The sun hung low over the Mojave, painting the desert in shades of rust and gold. The small town of Copper Ridge consisted of maybe 30 buildings scattered across the sand like forgotten bones. A saloon, a general store, a jail that hadn't seen use in 3 years, and a boarding house that had seen better decades. Eleanor Marsh sat on the porch of that boarding house, peeling potatoes with the methodical precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times before. Her hands were weathered, spotted with age, each line telling a story the world had mostly forgotten. She was 62 years old, though she looked 70. The desert does that to a woman. It takes the softness and replaces it with leather. Her hair, once auburn, had turned a steel gray she no longer bothered to cover. She wore it pinned back, practical and severe. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her eyes a faded blue that had witnessed a rise and fall of empires in a small desert town. Eleanor had lived in Copper Ridge for 40 years. She'd come as a young woman, idealistic and full of hope, accompanying a man who'd promised her fortune and a good life. He'd given her neither before dying of fever in 1877. She'd stayed because leaving required energy she no longer had, and the town had a way of holding on to people whether they wanted to stay or not. The boarding house was her domain. She cooked, cleaned, let rooms to drifters and salesmen passing through. The work was simple and honest, and it required nothing from her except that she show up. Showing up was something Eleanor had perfected. A horseman approached on the road from the east, kicking up dust that caught the late afternoon light. Eleanor didn't look up from her potatoes. Drifters came to Copper Ridge regularly. Some stayed a night, some 2. They were all much the same, tired, whether by roads that went nowhere, carrying secrets they'd never share. He dismounted slowly, as if every movement caused him pain. Eleanor glanced up then. There was something in his manner that suggested real suffering, not the performative exhaustion of a man simply tired from travel. He was maybe 40, she guessed, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples. His face was handsome in the way men's faces become handsome through living, shaped by experience, carved by time and trouble. He wore a Confederate coat, faded now, repaired in places with different fabric. She'd seen that coat 100 times on men half his age, and it always meant the same thing. The war was still ongoing, at least inside him. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Do you have a room?" Eleanor set down her knife and potato. "I do. That would be 50 cents a night. Breakfast is included. Supper is extra. I'll take a room for 2 nights, he said, and supper both nights." She stood, moving slower than she once did, feeling the protest in her knees. "You're the first guest in 3 weeks. You miss much." He smiled slightly. A quiet place is worth something. His name was James Coltrane. He didn't offer his history, and Eleanor didn't ask. They served no purpose in Copper Ridge, these pasts. Everyone here was running from something or waiting for something that would never come. It was better not to know which was which. She showed him to the corner room on the 2nd floor. It was small and clean, with a bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the desert. The light at this hour was spectacular, turning everything gold and crimson. He stood at the window for a long moment without speaking. "Supper's at 6, Eleanor said. "I make beef stew on Thursdays. Fresh bread." "I'll be down," he replied. At supper, they ate in the kitchen. Eleanor had a rule about not sitting alone with guests, but there was no one else to see, and James seemed to understand her unease without her having to voice it. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the clink of spoons and the occasional comment about the food. The next morning, Eleanor found him on the back porch at dawn, watching the light change. She'd woken early to make breakfast, bacon, eggs, fresh biscuits. She found herself making more than she usually did, and pretended not to notice. "Morning," he said. "This is a fine place you run." "It's a quiet place," Eleanor said. "Not always the same thing as fine." He turned to look at her. "You've been here a long time." "Alone?" It wasn't a question. Eleanor felt something in her chest tighten. A muscle, a memory, a hope she'd thought long dead. She turned away, busying herself with the porch railing. "I'm 62, she said flatly. "Too old for whatever you're thinking." "I'm not thinking anything," James said. Except that you're still here, still working, still making biscuits at dawn for people who don't deserve them. That takes a kind of strength most people don't have. Eleanor didn't respond. She went inside and laid out his breakfast. That afternoon, while Eleanor rested in her room, James walked into town. He returned with supplies from the general store, a fine bolt of blue cloth, soap that smelled of lavender, tea from somewhere back east. He left them on the kitchen table, without explanation. At supper that second night, Eleanor served the same beef stew. She wore the cloth he'd brought, fashioned into a simple dress that covered her from neck to wrist. She said nothing about it. He noticed, of course. His eyes lingered for a moment, but he didn't comment. After they ate, he asked her to sit with him on the porch. Eleanor hesitated, then did. They sat in silence as the stars emerged, the desert cooling around them. "I'm leaving at dawn," James said. "I've got business in California. I don't know if I'll be back." Eleanor nodded. She'd expected as much. "But I wanted to stay tonight," he continued. "Not as a guest. As something more if you'll have me." Eleanor turned to look at him. In the starlight, she could see the truth in his face. He meant it, not out of pity or loneliness, though perhaps both were there, but out of genuine desire. He saw her. Not the age, not the exhaustion, not the years of solitude. He saw something worth wanting. "I'm too old," she said, the same protest she'd made days before. "For what?" he asked. "For living? For matching? For being wanted? You're wrong about that." She considered walking away. She could feel the weight of decades telling her this was foolish, that a woman her age had no business entertaining such thoughts. But she'd spent her whole life listening to that voice, and it had gotten her here, alone, fading, becoming invisible. "All right," she said. That night, Eleanor Marsh felt young, not in the false way of pretense, but in the fundamental way of being wanted, of matching, of standing at the threshold between who she'd been and who she might still become. James moved slowly with her, carefully, as though she were something precious. He listened to her stories, about the man she'd loved and lost, about the decades in Copper Ridge, about the dreams she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten them. He held her hand like he was holding something irreplaceable. In the morning, he left. He pressed a thick envelope into her hand. More money than she made in 6 months, and a letter addressed to a lawyer in Sacramento. "It's a property," he said, "near the coast. If you wanted to leave this place, you could." Eleanor didn't want to leave. She loved Copper Ridge, loved the boarding house, loved the routine that made her feel alive. But she understood what he was really offering. The knowledge that her life was still open, still full of possibility, that she wasn't finished. "Will you come back?" she asked. "If you want me to," he said. She nodded. "I do." He smiled and kissed her forehead and rode out toward the sunrise. Eleanor never used the property deed. She kept it in a box under her bed, a promise of what could be rather than what would be. But everything changed after James left. She began writing letters to editors, telling stories about the Old West, about the people who built this country. She dressed in that blue cloth every Sunday. She started teaching reading to children who came to the boarding house. 3 years later, James returned. He stayed for a week, then a month. By the following spring, he built a small house just outside of town. He never moved into the boarding house, respecting her need for independence, but he was there every morning for breakfast and every evening for supper. Eleanor lived to 91. When she died, the town closed for her funeral. James buried her wearing the blue dress he'd brought her, and the wedding ring he'd given her in that second, secret way of theirs. Not in a church, but in a partnership that mattered more than any official ceremony. At her grave, James said something the preacher didn't write down, something just for her. "You were never too old. You were exactly the right age to become who you were meant to be." And that, perhaps, was the real magic of the desert. Not that it made people fade, but that if you were stubborn enough and lucky enough, it might teach you to shine brighter the older you became.